Think back to how many years of your life you spent sitting in a classroom. Go on, actually, kid. Pry on it. Primary, secondary school, maybe college on top. For most people, it's somewhere between 12 and 17 years. Years of alarms and bells and homework and exams and sitting still in a chair being told to pay attention. Years of your one short life spent inside a building, learning. Now here's the thing that should genuinely mess with your head a little. For more than 300,000 years, not a single one of your ancestors ever went to school. Not for a day. There were no classrooms, no teachers, no textbooks, no exams, no grades, no homework, no sit down and be quiet. None of it existed. And yet, every single one of them, everything they needed to survive, in one of the most dangerous, complicated environments imaginable. They learned to hunt, to find water, to identify hundreds of plants, to make tools and fire and clothing, to track animals, to read the weather, the seasons, the stars. They learned the entire encyclopedia of staying alive, with no school. So how? How do you learn everything, a whole functioning adult skill set, with no teachers, no books, and no classrooms? Because the answer is that they just knew less. They knew a staggering amount. The answer is that ancient humans had a completely different way of learning. And here's the part that stings a little. In some ways, it worked better than the system you spent half your childhood inside. This is the story of how humans learned before school existed. And by the end, you might start to wonder if we took a wrong turn somewhere. Let's start by demolishing an image that's probably in your head, because it's completely wrong. When you picture an ancient human, you might picture someone simple, grunting, bumbling around, barely scraping by, not knowing much of anything. It's the cartoon caveman, and it could not be further from the truth. An ancient hunter-gatherer was, by any fair measure, one of the most knowledgeable human beings who has ever lived. Not in the sense of knowing algebra or history dates, but in the sense of raw, functional, life-or-death expertise. A typical forager could identify hundreds, sometimes over 1,000, different species of plants and animals. They knew which ones you could eat, which would kill you, which would heal you, which was food only in a certain season, which part of which plant was safe, and which part was poison. That's a working knowledge of botany and pharmacology that would embarrass most modern adults, who struggle to name 10 plants in their own neighborhood. They could look at a set of faint scratches in the dirt and tell you what animal made them, how big it was, which direction it went, how fast it was moving, and how long ago it passed. That's a level of tracking skill that takes modern experts years to develop, and ancient humans had it as standard equipment. They could read the sky and predict weather. They could navigate across huge distances with no map and no compass, using the sun, the stars, the wind, the shape of the land. They knew the mating seasons and migration patterns of dozens of animals. They could make everything they owned from scratch with their own hands. This was not a simple person. This was a person carrying an enormous library of knowledge in their head, arguably as much specialized, practical information as you'd need a whole shelf of textbooks to hold today. And they absorbed all of it without ever sitting in a single lesson. So the real question isn't whether they learned, it's how they pulled off something that sounds impossible. And the first secret is so simple, you'll almost be annoyed by it. Here's the foundation of how humans learned for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's beautifully simple. You learned by watching people do the real thing, and then trying it yourself. We have a fancy word for this now, observational learning, but it's just the most natural thing in the world. A child in an ancient community wasn't taken away from the adults and put in a room with other children. They were right there, all day, every day, in the thick of real life. When the adults made tools, the kids were watching. When they butchered an animal, prepared food, built a shelter, started a fire, treated a wound, the children were a few feet away, watching, absorbing, and increasingly helping. Think about powerful that is compared to how you learn things. You learned about how food is grown from a diagram in a textbook, tested on a worksheet, and then promptly forgot it because you never touched a plant. An ancient child learned how food is found by actually being there while it happened, thousands of times, with all their senses, with real stakes embedded in real life. There's no comparison. One is abstract and forgettable. The other is burned into you. And human beings are spectacularly good at this kind of learning. It might be our single greatest talent as a species. We are natural-born copycats. Our brains are wired to watch another person do something skillful and then reverse engineer it. We do it so automatically we don't even notice. Scientists have found that we have systems in the brain that fire both when we do an action and when we watch someone else do it, as if part of your mind rehearses the movement just by observing. It's a huge part of why humans can accumulate skills across generations in a way no other animal can. A young chimp learns mostly by trial and error. A young human watches an expert and gets a massive head start. So the first classroom was simply life itself, observed up close. But watching only gets you so far. To really learn a skill, you have to do it. And ancient humans had a genius method for the doing part, one that, again, they were better at than we are. Ask yourself, what do children do the second nobody's forcing them to do anything else? And it turns out that play isn't a break from learning. For most of human history, play was the learning. It might be the most important educational tool our species ever had. Watch what children naturally play at, in any culture, and you'll notice something. They play at being adults. They play hunt. They play fight. They play at cooking, at building, at caring for babies, at making the things the grown-ups make. Little kids in ancient communities would have run around with tiny versions of real tools, stalking imaginary prey, mimicking the exact skills they'd need as adults, and it looked to them like nothing but fun. But here's the genius of it. Through that play, they were practicing the most important survival skills, over and over, thousands of times, with zero pressure and zero fear of failure. If a kid misses an imaginary animal during play, nothing happens, they just laugh and try again. So they build the skill in a completely safe, low-stakes environment, driven entirely by their own enjoyment, long before their life actually depends on it. By the time a young person needed to really hunt, or really build, or track, their body and brain had already run the drills countless times through years of play. Compare that to how we treat play now. We shove it into a short recess and treat it as the opposite of learning, the thing you do when you're not learning. Ancient humans would find that bizarre. To them, a child playing was a child in the middle of their most important education, and the science increasingly agrees. Kids learn deeply through self-directed play, problem-solving, physical skill, soul negotiation, creativity, often far better than they learn from being lectured at. We took the most natural learning system on Earth and labeled it a waste of time. And notice what's missing from all of this so far. Nobody is forcing anything. The watching, it's all driven by the kid's own curiosity and enjoyment. Which brings us to maybe the biggest difference of all between how they learned and how we do. Real quick, if you're finding this as fascinating as I do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about the surprising truth of how our ancestors lived, and there's a new story every week. Thank you. Now back to it. Here's something genuinely radical about ancient learning. It was almost entirely self-directed. Children learned what they wanted, when they were ready, at their own pace, driven by their own curiosity. There was no curriculum. No, today we are learning this whether you like it or not. No adult standing over them, forcing a subject into their head on a schedule. And this wasn't neglect, it was, in a sense, a deep trust in a child's natural drive to learn. And that drive is real and it is powerful. Watch any small child. They are relentless learning machines. They ask why 1,000 times. They want touch everything, try everything, copy everyone. Human children are born insatiably curious. Because for most of our history, that curiosity was the engine that made them learn everything they needed without anyone forcing them. A child wants to do what the big people do. They want to be competent. That hunger did the teaching. Anthropologists who've studied the last hunter-gatherer societies noticed this, and were often stunned by it. Children were given enormous freedom. They weren't ordered around or drilled. They were trusted to learn by being around real life, playing, and gradually joining in when they felt ready. And they did. They grew into fully skilled adults, every time without a single lesson forced on them. Now here's the uncomfortable mirror. Think about how curiosity tends to work in a classroom. A lot of kids start school bursting with questions and end it having learned, above all, to sit still, be quiet, and wait to be told what to do. We take that ferocious natural curiosity, and too often, we accidentally train it out of people by turning learning into something done to you on someone else's schedule, rather than something you chase because you're dying to know. Ancient humans never made that mistake because they never had to. Their entire education system ran on the fuel of a child's own desire to understand the world. And a person who wants to learn something learns it in a way that a person forced to learn it almost never does. But curiosity and play can only teach you what one person can discover on their own. The really deep knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of generations, needed a different tool. And it's the most human tool of all. Imagine you need to pass on absolutely critical information. Where the water is during a drought that only happens once every 50 years. Or which rare berry will save your life and which nearly identical one will kill you. Or how your people came to be and what they believe. You have no writing, no books, nothing you can look up. The only place this knowledge can live is inside human heads, and the only way to move it from one head to another is to speak it. So how do you make sure vital knowledge survives perfectly across generations with no written backup? You do the single most powerful thing humans ever invented for memory. You turn it into a story. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment around the fire, though it was that too. Storytelling was the library. It was the textbook, the history book, the survival manual, and the moral guide, all rolled into one, and all designed to stick in a human mind for a lifetime. Because here's a fact about your brain. It is terrible at remembering dry facts and lists, and incredible at remembering stories. A list of rules goes in one ear and out the other. But a gripping story, with characters, danger, emotion, a twist you'll remember for the rest of your life. Ancient humans understood this in their bones, long before any scientist proved it. So the knowledge got wrapped in stories. The location of that once-in-50 years water source might be encoded in a myth about an ancestor who traveled there. The deadly plant might live forever in a scary tale about someone who ate it and what happened to them. The rules of how to treat each other were carried and storied in stories about heroes and fools, the rewarded and the punished. Some of these stories, passed down purely by mouth, appear to have preserved real information across astonishing spans of time. There are tales told by some peoples that seem to accurately describe landscapes and coastlines as they were thousands of years ago, before the seas rose. Knowledge kept alive by nothing but storytelling for hundreds of generations. And the storyteller, the elder who held the most stories, wasn't just an entertainer. They were the most precious resource the group had. A living library, a walking university. To lose an elder was to lose a whole archive of knowledge that existed nowhere else on Earth. which is exactly why ancient societies revered their old people in a way our youth-obsessed culture often doesn't. An elder wasn't past their usefulness. An elder was the internet, the encyclopedia, and the history books, all in one irreplaceable person. But knowing things wasn't enough. At some point, a young person had to be recognized as ready to cross the line from child to adult. And ancient humans marked that moment in a way that puts our graduation ceremonies to shame. You had exams in school. You crammed, you sat in a silent room, you filled in answers, you got a grade, and then you forgot most of it within a month. Now, that was your test of readiness. Ancient humans had something very different: the rite of passage. And it was a test with real meaning. Across cultures all over the world, when a young person was approaching adulthood, they didn't get a certificate. They got a challenge. Often a difficult, sometimes frightening, deeply serious ordeal designed to prove to themselves and the whole community that they had truly learned what they needed to survive and to belong. It might mean surviving alone in the wilderness for a stretch of time, using every skill they'd absorbed over the years. It might mean a first solo hunt. It might involve ceremony, hardship, endurance, or facing a real fear. The specifics varied enormously, but the underlying idea was everywhere. To become an adult, you had to demonstrate that your years of watching and learning had made you genuinely capable. And think about how profoundly different that is from a written exam. A rite of passage wasn't testing whether you could regurgitate facts. It was testing whether you could actually do the thing, whether the knowledge was real and lived in your hands and your nerve, not just your short-term memory. Pass it, and you weren't handed a piece of paper. You were welcomed, for the rest of your life, as a full adult member of the group, with a new status, new responsibilities, and no doubt in anyone's mind, including your own, that you had earned it. There's something powerful there that we've almost entirely lost. Modern life has very few clear moments where you cross, unmistakably, from child to adult. We drift into adulthood vaguely, uncertainly, often not feeling like a real grown-up until years after we technically are one. Ancient humans had a bright, hard line and a real trial to cross it, and on the other side, a completely secure sense of, I did the thing, I am capable, I belong. Their education didn't just end. It graduated them, for real. Let's step back and be fair, because it's easy to romanticize this, and the honest picture has two sides. On one hand, no, we shouldn't throw out schools. The ancient system worked beautifully for teaching the fixed, practical skills of a way of life that changed very slowly across thousands of years. But it could not have taught you to read, or do mathematics, or understand medicine, or fly a plane, or any of the vast, abstract, accumulated knowledge that modern life runs on. School exists because, at some point, humans built up far more knowledge than any one person could absorb just by watching their parents and hearing stories. You cannot learn calculus by playing, or medicine by imitation alone. Formal schooling is how we pass on the towering mountain of specialized knowledge that a modern world requires. That's not nothing. That's how we got you the device you're watching this on. But, and it's a real but, in becoming so good at teaching abstract knowledge, we quietly abandoned some things the ancient way had exactly right. We took learning, which is naturally driven by curiosity, and too often made it something forced. We took play, the most powerful learning tool in the human toolkit, and shoved it to the margins as a waste of time. We separated children from the real adult world they're desperate to understand, and sat them in rooms doing abstract tasks, disconnected from anything they can see or touch. We replaced real, meaningful tests of capability with exams that measure how well you memorize and then forget. And we lost the clean, powerful moment of becoming an adult, and the deep confidence that came with it. The ancient human learned everything by being trusted, by being curious, by playing, by watching real life, by hearing unforgettable stories, and by finally proving themselves in a way that genuinely mattered. No bells, no grades, no sitting still, and they walked into adulthood as some of the most capable, knowledgeable, self-assured people who ever lived. So the next time you think about those 12 or 15 years you spent in a classroom, it's worth asking a strange and honest question. We know so much more than they did. Our knowledge is vast beyond anything they could have dreamed. But did we ever really learn how to learn as well as they did? For 300,000 years, humans figured out everything they needed to know without a single school. They just watched and played and listened and did, until one day they were ready. And somewhere along the way to building our incredible modern world, I can't help but feel we forgot a little bit of how natural and how joyful learning was always supposed to be.